Gideon was an Israelite. He was a Jew, and the Israelites were under attack by the Midianites. The Midianites were their enemies. They were attacked. They were being attacked for basically 7 years. They were at war, and they were just getting brutally conquered. In fact, the Bible says that God turned the Israelites over to the Midianites for these 7 years, and the Midianites were brutal. In fact, so much so that when they would come through, all of the Jews would go and they would hide. They would hide in caves. They would hide in the woods. They would hide anywhere they could, so that way they would not be in the path. And as the Midianites would come through, they would just decimate and destroy everything. The Hebrews, the Jews, the Israelites, they would plant gardens and farms, and they would raise livestock, and they would do all of these things. But then at harvest time, these Midianites would come through on their donkeys and with their livestock and with their camels. They'd come through with all this stuff, and they would just eat everything. They would just destroy it, and they would take all of the harvest. They'd strip the land bare. The Bible says they would come in like locusts, and they would just destroy and take everything. And as a result, God's chosen people, the Jews, they were in hiding, and they were also starving. They're starving to death. They're hiding. And this is where we find Gideon. In Judges chapter 6, verse 11, it says, "Then the angel of the Lord came." Now we've talked about the angel of the Lord in the first part of the series. And whenever we see the angel of the Lord written in this way in the Old Testament, now keep in mind, this is the Old Testament. This is the first part of the Bible before Jesus was born, before he was born and died on the cross and all that. But when you see angel of the Lord, most theologians agree this is actually Jesus appearing in the Old Testament before he was born, because Jesus was God all along, and he's appearing in this angelic form, in this bodily form to these people. It says the angel of the Lord came and sat beneath the great tree at Ophrah. This is not Oprah, okay? This is Ophrah, which belongs to Joash of the clan of Abiezer. Now Gideon, son of Joash, so this tree belongs to his dad, okay? So he's sitting there beneath the tree. Gideon, the son of Joash, he's doing something kind of odd here, right? He was threshing wheat at the bottom of a wine press. Wine presses are for making wine, not for threshing grain. Generally, when you thresh grain, you'd go on top of a hill where it's windy. They would beat the grain so it would separate, and then they would throw it in the air, and the wind would blow the chaff away, and they'd be left with the grain that they could use. But now, that's not where Gideon is. He's in a wine press. Now, as you can imagine, there's not much wind in the bottom of a wine press. When you're trying to thresh this grain, this is not the ideal place to be doing it. Why is he there, though? It says Joash was threshing wheat at the bottom of a wine press to hide the grain from the Midianites. He had a little bit of grain. It was all that him and his family probably had to eat. And he's there threshing it, and he's hiding in a wine press, dug below the surface of the ground, and he's threshing this grain. And the angel of the Lord appears to him and says, "Mighty hero, the Lord is with you." It's kind of funny, isn't it? Wait, what is he doing? He's threshing grain in a wine press because he's afraid. And here the angel of the Lord is saying, "Hey, mighty hero." Like, I don't know. I can't understand the tone here. I don't know if this is sarcasm. I don't know what's going on here. But he's like, "Hey, mighty hero." Gideon's probably like, "Excuse me, could you keep your voice down?" You ever hiding on somebody? You're hiding, or you don't want somebody to see you, and you're hiding, and somebody else comes up and starts talking to you, and it's like, "Hold on, could you just keep your voice down? I don't want anybody to know that I'm here right now." And that's where Gideon is. He's hiding. It's kind of funny. He's not being heroic. He's scared here. And he's in the wine press. He's in the pits. You ever find yourself in the pits? Ever find yourself hiding in the pits? You don't want to be found. You're down. You're low. And it's like, man, I just don't want any attention being brought to myself right now. Imagine being called a hero when you're hiding for your life. But it's interesting that this is how God sees him. And this is how God sees you and how God sees me. See, God sees us in a different way. He sees us not as we are, but he sees us as who we could become. He sees us as who he has created us to be. He sees what he's put inside of us. In your notes, if you're taking them, God sees potential when all we see are problems.